Welcome to Unite Now, where we bring unity to you, wherever you are.
Hi, I'm Marc Tanenbaum. I'm the product manager for Cinemachine at Unity Technologies in Montreal. And with me is Adam Myhill, the creator of Cinemachine. Hey, Adam.
Hey, Marc. Nice to see you again. So my name is Adam Myhill. I'm a creative director at Unity Labs, and I'm outside of Vancouver.
Cool.
We're here today to chat with you about Cinemachine.
Yeah. So, Adam, I want to just start with some history here. You first, I know there was Cinebot and maybe even something before that, and Cinebot goes back to 2006. You've been working on this a long time. This is a passion for you, not just a job. What's the reasoning? Why is this worth doing?
Yeah, it's somehow this thing has turned into a lifelong career, which is, here's how it started. Year 2000, I started a little bit before working at Electronic Arts. I was there for 15 years. And I started as an artist and a photographer, actually, and taking pictures for them. And I wanted to get into game development so badly and to work on the cameras and the cinematography of how games were. And I think 2000, right? That's a long time ago. Games were pretty primitive. And when I inquired about what the tools were, they would say, here are your tools. And you would sit next to a programmer. And you'd be like, okay, I want to do this. And an engineer would code something. And then that was it. And if you wanted to tune the variables, you would have to either go ask the engineer or change a number and recompile the game. And I thought, this is crazy. This is no way. How do you build art like this? So that started the beginning of designing an artist-centric camera creation tool.
So what we have now is way more powerful than that. An artist doesn't have to go to an engineer every time they want to change something.
Yeah, and that was the crux of the motivation behind it. Because you need to make happy accidents. You need to try a number too big. Sometimes you don't know what the number is. You have to feel it out, and you just want to get in there and tweak it without having to bother other people. So, the first system was in a series of games called NBA Street, and then we built a system called Cinebot that was in Frostbite, and it's went on to be in a whole bunch of EA games. And then I left EA and started building this camera system once I met Unity. And I'm like, hey, this is great. Let's put it on the asset store. I'm going to build a camera system. We used it in a game called Homeworld Deserts of Karak, which all the cinematics were procedural because your fleet can change. So we never know what vehicles you're in. So how do you do cinematics on variable scenarios? You'll hear me say that a few times. And then it was acquired by Unity, and here we are. And we've got an amazing team, Gregory LeBeau and Christian Berkes, and we are just cranking on new features and keeping the dream alive and continuing to build and listen to people and push this crazy idea forward.
That's super awesome. So here, look, a question I get all the time, and I get it on the forums, and I get it from customers, and I'm sure you'll hear it all the time, is Cinemachine for games or is it for film? How do you answer that question?
Our marketing, everybody thinks that it's for film and for cinematics, and it's got some great tools for that. But truth be told, was built for game cameras, and the majority of Cinemachine is for interactive things. So, third person, orbit cameras, collision systems, follow cameras. Most of the stuff in there is for games, but the cinematic stuff was really handy too. And this is one of the things that went back to actually driving Composer. Is as a camera artist, you would do camera animations, keyframe. I'm talking pre-Cinemachine. And then an animator would come in on the weekend and change the speed of something, and you'd fire up your project the next day, and your cameras were looking at blue sky. And there's no relationship between the camera and the subject in CG. Typically, you're just empty keyframing camera, and they're animating, and it happens to all line up. And one of the core, the spirit behind Cinemachine is there's a relationship between the camera and the subject. Therefore, your subject can change, and you've given the camera intent, and it's going to, film or follow or handle the variability, hopefully appropriately.
So, okay, so let's take the present and just shift a little bit into the very near future. 2.6 is in preview, which means that version is not yet verified, but it's on its road to being verified. And so, like, I've got another monitor over here. I've got a list of features that we've worked on here, and I just want to talk to you a little bit about them because it's a pretty long list for a little dot release. By far, my favorite piece of 2.6, and it's the silliest thing imaginable, but it really makes a difference to me when I use Cinemachine when I work, is the simple workflow improvement of just putting the new virtual camera that you create where the scene view is. This was, I think, suggested. I think this was suggested by was this suggested by Krasi? I don't even know.
No, it goes back really far. There's reasons why it didn't happen sooner. But in all modesty, I did a Twitter post about that, and someone responded something like, "You mean a feature that's been in Max since 40 years ago or something?" Yeah, there were reasons it didn't exist until now, but I agree with you. Oh my God, it's the simplest thing, and holy moly, it's great to have that.
Yeah. So it's a little bit embarrassing that it's taken us this long, but I'm really happy it's there.
Me too.
So we have so the impulse system now has this notion of propagation. What's that about?
So the impulse system is something that I really want to communicate more because it does something that's such a pain in the ass to do manually. It's a camera shake system. So what impulse lets you do is it lets you put impulses on things in the world, guns firing, heavy footsteps, explosions, whatever. And then you can have multiple channels for how the camera reacts to it. So you can have a camera shake appropriately differently for a shotgun than it can for a sniper rifle or for a big footstep versus a small footstep. And the shakes are position, intensity, and like world relative. So it doesn't just do a dumb shake the camera. It actually shakes the camera appropriately based on where the thing's coming from. And it's amazing. You can look at the shakes and it actually gives you a sense of like understanding of where something's coming from. And that with good audio means you can really feel stuff.
You can create that connection between the camera. You create that connection between the camera and the world that the camera is in.
Totally. And that's, Mike, that's magic when you feel it. And that just works out of the box. And the propagation, that allows you to kind of create a fluid, if you will, a density of the environment. So you can create like shock waves. So when an impulse goes off, it doesn't hit everywhere at the same time. And it's not just for cameras too. I mean, you could put an impulse listener on an object. We've got a demo where the impulse thing goes off and there's like a whole sea of like cubes on the ground, and it just looks like a shockwave propagating through all the cubes, and they all bounce. And then when it gets to the camera bounces too. It's a very powerful little gizmo.
That's really cool.
And I'd like to see people getting it out there because it's so much simpler than writing your own system. I mean, we did it. Use it.
Cool. How about, and I know this is one that means a lot to you. There's the new aiming rig. Like, that's really interesting.
The current free look rig doesn't solve all the problems, and we know that. It's kind of a more cinematic free look rig, in that it gives you orbit controls and it lets you like look at things, and it's very smooth. And if you're to reference games, it's kind of like more like The Last of Us. It's not a good targeting rig. In fact, it's a pretty bad targeting rig. So this new rig complements that, and it gives you like pixel perfect screen aware targeting. Still a third person orbit camera. You have offset controls and damping, all those things, but it's specifically focused for aiming and shooting. And we've gone to the length to not just shoot from the center of the screen. If the character's weapon's behind a wall, we do a ray cast. So it's actually coming from the weapon and not the center of the screen. You've got controls for that. We spent a long time on it. Christian on our team gets a really big thumbs up for that. And it's a very welcome additional orbit camera module.
One of the samples I really love is the magnet setup. It's a magnet sample. Tell me about that. Why did we create that one?
It's a really cool extension of functionality to the target group setup, which I want to chat about. But before that, why do you like the magnet group?
I love this one. So what's interesting to me is I think about these game setups, and this actually came from a request of a user on our forum, and he was expressing, actually he or she, I don't even know, but this user was expressing a desire to be able to move between parts of their game, and they wanted to be able to have the camera be reweighted. So it's following the character, but as you get close, I don't know, say to a dragon's horde or something like this, you want the camera to start taking that horde in and sort of putting some influence on the camera to go towards the horde. And that way you can sort of bring multiple elements together as you get close to them. And that's what the magnets does. The magnet just draws the camera to it when it gets close enough. We improved look ahead in Cinemachine 2.6. What was there to improve?
So there were a few things to improve, and it is much better now. So what look ahead does is it takes the movement of whatever you're looking at, typically the composer, and if, say, something's moving on the screen, it will look ahead, just like the name says, so you can get that composition that is a leading composition. So let's say you're center punching a composition of a character, but you have look ahead. When the character starts to run, the camera will look forward a little bit, and you have control for the amount of look ahead, and you've got a damping control. We use it all the time because it just gives you more human-like framing. So I'm not exactly sure what Gregory did. He says it's simpler and faster, which is always nice to hear, but it just feels better. So it's not quite as erratic or noisy as the old look ahead, and it doesn't freak out in as many situations with characters like maybe pop teleporting.
Right.
And it's a really, really easy way to give more human-like framing compositional guides on variable subjects.
That's really nice. Probably everybody who's watching this has heard us say something from Unity about DOTS, the data-oriented tech stack. And this is obviously really important to Unity, but I want to just talk for a moment about what that tech stack means for Cinemachine. Why should anybody watching this care about DOTS in Cinemachine?
Yeah, well, that's a good question. Why do we want light cameras? Well, it's no big deal if we just have a few cameras, but it's a huge deal if we want lots of cameras. And when I mean lots, I mean tens of thousands. And then
why would you want tens of thousands of camera, Adam?
Okay. So let me back up just a squidge. If you think of Cinemachine as a virtual camera operator, it frames, it moves, it's a camera person. We're working on some technology called Cinecast, which is a virtual director, which means editing, like shot evaluation, understanding rules of cinematography, not cutting across a director line, not cutting to a camera that's, practically the same. And we see a world with like 3D volumetric sports, like real sports, like this is a real thing now, esports, all needing this problem to be solved. And how do you make a cinematic sequence of an event in real time or near real time? How do you film something when you don't know what's going to happen next? It's a really hard problem. And one of the ways you can get through the problem is to have a lot of cameras to choose from. So if you've got a video game and you've got people running around and you've got 10,000 cameras, some are following this guy, some are following that guy, some are on the floor, some are emulating a cameraman, some are doing all these different things, and you can evaluate across them. You can see the cameras that are good, the cameras that are bad, the cameras that are going to be good, the cameras that got good composition. So then when you start to apply these cinematic rules, you can generate a beautiful output, but you need lots of cameras. And the only way you can get lots of cameras, and I mean like literally tens of thousands of cameras, is DOTS. And that's what we're doing, and it's working.
Got it. Okay. So thanks, Adam. That's great. So look, we've talked about the past, we've talked about the present, we've talked about the future. I want to get some guys on who are doing Cinemachine in a big way right now. So first, let's bring on Onat. He's from Slow Brothers. He is working on a game called Halibut. It's amazing. Yeah, we're gonna talk to him and learn a little bit about what he's been up to.
It's always me who has to get his hands dirty. Headquarters said to prepare for a messy crime scene, but this is textbook work out of a slasher movie. I knew I should have stayed in bed today.
Harold! Stop daydreaming! And don't forget to fix the light after cleaning up the paint.
Sometimes I do wonder what life would have been like on Earth.
And joining us is Onat Hekimoglu, who is with Slow Brothers. And Onat, you guys have been working for a while on really just the most amazing. It's such a beautiful game. It's called Halibut. And the thing I'd just like to start with, before we say anything about Cinemachine, is just talk to us a little bit about how you get that amazing claymation look that's in your game.
Well, that's an easy answer, actually. We are actually building everything. So everything you see in the game is hand-built in a workshop. We are forming puppets out of clay and building sets out of wood and metal and things like that. And then we're scanning everything through a process called photogrammetry. So we are making a bunch of photos and running them through a software to create these 3D models. And then there are several steps of processing the models because, by the time they are scanned, they are very high poly. So we have to reduce them to be able to use them in the game. And yeah, that's basically it. So it's scanned real world models that create the look.
Yeah, and the effect is amazing.
Cool. It really is a handcrafted game.
Yeah.
It's incredible. Okay, and so why Cinemachine? Why did you start using Cinemachine in the first place for this project?
We were looking for a good way to control cameras, and I personally have a film background, and I'm used to a certain way to handle cameras, and I was missing that with the usual standard Unity camera. And Cinemachine actually gives us a lot of control and also makes it easy at the same time to arrange shots, to kind of have this virtual camera operator that helps you with finding the right shots. And we're basically much more focused on actually composing than kind of setting up parameters and so on to get the shot right. And that's what I really like with that.
That's really cool. So yeah, could you maybe just dig in a little to the specific components from Cinemachine that you use a lot?
Yes, of course. So there is the composer, for example, which is a really nice way to set up shots. Because of these nice tracking features, it makes it really easy, even if, for example, cutscenes change later in the game, or especially also in gameplay, to have these dynamic shots that track the character while still being able to arrange them in a certain way in the frame. So that's really, really useful. And sometimes even when we don't use the tracking feature in game, it's a handy way to find the right shot. So I'm often using a target and just moving the camera around to find a nice shot, and then just deactivate the composer, put the camera to do nothing again, and have that shot fixed. So it makes it really easy to work with that. So you only have to care for the position instead of caring for both for rotational values and the position while setting something up.
So you're using it as just like a fast layout way to like try to get shot ideas, and once you're in the
Exactly,
ballpark,
yeah.
you turn it off and then you manually do it. Yeah, that's cool.
That's really interesting.
Then, of course, the blending, that's really, really powerful. So we used that everywhere. Basically, every room that we set up has one or more than one cameras. And for the transitions between rooms, if our character moves from one room to another, we basically just activate or enable and disable cameras. And the transition happens magically and automatically. So that's really nice. And also, it's a really nice thing a really nice way to work in the timeline. So especially it actually works for most of the shots that we do, for most of the camera movements. Of course, sometimes if you have more complicated camera movements, you need to keyframe something. But even then, just to get a feeling for the scene and to set up shots, we often just use different shots and blend between them in the timeline. And that's a really quick way of actually creating camera movement.
Cool.
So now you're using it not just for cinematics, but for the gameplay as well.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And you seamlessly go between them. Like your game's so interesting that you never know if you're playing or like you've got this very fluid relationship between those two worlds.
Yeah, that was actually a really important factor for us. We wanted to create a game that doesn't only feel cinematic in the cinematic parts, but the whole game actually. So there are not too many interface elements and things like that interrupt that feeling. And the same goes with the camera. So sometimes we actually had some funny test situations where people were playing and there was a cutscene, and it took them a while to get that they are back in gameplay again because everything moves in and out so fluidly. And that makes it really easy. For example, especially moving from normal gameplay to dialogues or cutscenes, we again, just blend to the dialogue camera, and it can be either a hard cut or a camera movement by blending two cameras. And after the dialogue has happened, we disable the camera again, blend back to the gameplay camera, and everything goes like seamlessly into each other.
Cool.
Such a cool use case.
We recorded an earlier segment about target groups, but can you explain what that brings value to for you?
You were doing like multiple joints or targets in the same character, like a head and a spine in a target group. What was that about?
Yeah. So it's when we started working with the composer, I was actually only tracking the head, and this works for a lot of scenes. But sometimes, if the characters change from sitting to standing, for example, or crawling, it's not always the right way, I had the feeling. And that's why we started to actually insert several parts of the character. Oftentimes it's the root and the head, so we can always track the whole character. This is also helpful with our zoom function, by the way. We have a zoom function where you can actually zoom into things, and in the very first iteration, we had a very complicated system where we had to work between cameras and then, to find the objects that are in the shot and so on. Now it's basically only one camera that we are activating by pressing the zoom button. And then we have the focus point of our character, the character himself, and whatever else is important automatically slotted into a target group. So all of these things are in the screen. So it works with everything basically we look at.
Adam mentioned earlier the interplay that you have between the cinematics and the gameplay, and you were saying, how smooth it was. Almost people didn't notice. But part of that is like the cinematics are quite variable, right? They can be variable in length. So how is Cinemachine helping you with that? How do you make that work?
And how many are there? Like, tell us. It's some astronomical number. How many hours are in your game?
Well, we have 8 hours of dialogue in the game. So yeah, that's crazy. It's 70,000 words of dialogue, and until now we have recorded about like 2.5 or 3 hours of mocap, and there is more coming. So we are basically acting out all those scenes too. So it's going to be really cool. I have to show you that. We also use the what's the name of your component again? With the blendless camera.
Right.
Yeah.
I wish more people would use the blendless camera. I mean, I just think they don't know about it. Just tell us what it does really briefly.
It's basically a Cinemachine and Cinemachine or something like that. I would maybe call it. It's like the Cinemachineception thing. So it's basically a list of cameras, and you can set up the blending time in between them, and it's kind of like and it follows this list by blending from one camera to another. Well, I don't know if there's even a limitation actually.
No, you can go crazy and put. I mean, can't think of a use case to add more than a few, but
Yeah. It was just something I thought about right now. But yeah, we mostly use it with only 2 cameras, and that's already like super useful. And yeah, because it makes it also really easy if I want to move that dolly shot, for example, just a little bit back and forth. Yeah, that's really nice.
Yeah.
And we have a system with a main camera and 2 dialogue cameras for each character. And based on the animation of the state of the character, so we have a talking state in our main character state machine. And this doesn't even have to contain any animation. That's the cool thing. So we can just create animation states in the animator and in Mechanim without even having animation on them, and just use them to actually switch or blend between cameras and the state-driven camera. And in our case, every time a character is talking, which is again driven through code, and once an audio file plays, we switch the animation state to is talking, and we automatically switch the shots to the character who is talking. And so this gives us basically the basic setup of the dialogues instantly, which is really nice.
I'm going to actually...
You've got a dynamic dialogue system.
Yeah.
Your dialogue has states. You're using state-driven camera to listen to those states and to call, cut, or blend to different cameras. So you're procedurally generating your cameras based on your dynamic dialogue system.
Yeah, exactly. Actually, when you say it like that, it sounds super complicated.
I was trying to summarize it, and I made it worse.
Correct me if I'm wrong.
It's a really nice summary, but I mean, it sounds so elaborate, but it's actually really a really easy setup, because Cinemachine actually makes it so easy. That's really cool.
Hey, speaking of mixing camera, you also use the Cinemachine mixing camera.
Yeah, exactly. So we are again at the marketplace, the Agora Arcades. So we have different stores there. We have an arcade, so it's a literal arcade, where you can play games, a bar, a general store, and so on. And it's this huge location. So we started with just a framing transposer camera first, which looked nice, but often we weren't close enough to, especially when we came closer to the stores. Later on, we placed some triggers, so we blend into some cameras. But again, it's just, there is a certain point or edge where suddenly this blending happens. So we wanted to have something more dynamic, and we use the mixing camera for that. We have written a little script that basically measures the distance to some game objects, basically empty game objects that we placed at the door of each of the stores, and one in the center of the whole place. And it basically measures the distance to the stores, and based on that, mixes 4 cameras if you get closer to the stores. And so
that's one of
let me say that back. So you've got 4 cameras in the mixer, and you're checking the distance between the character in different locations in the world, and then you're mixing the weights of those 4 cameras based on where the character position is in the world.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, cool. Yeah, that's awesome. That's such a great use case.
Okay, so last question for you, Onat. If you could add, and I'm not promising anything, but if you could add one feature to Cinemachine, what would that be?
Well, it would be a way to control the in-game camera with, for example, my smartphone. Use that as a controller to set up my shots and even maybe record the movement. This would be really cool to have that direct input of holding a camera and transfer that to Unity.
That's good.
Yeah, that's a good one.
That's actually a really good one.
That's heavily in production. Onat, we will show that to you very shortly.
That's great. I'm really excited to hear about that.
And we're going to cut that bit with Adam's response out of the final video, yes? Because I don't think we can say that. Again, this is Onat from Slow Brothers. The game is Halibut. It's amazing. You should totally check out the trailers. And Onat will be back with us in the last segment for a Q&A that we'll be doing live with all of you. So, Onat, thank you very much.
Thank you.
So we've got to start Krasimir, who works for Unity, but he's been working on the Heretic. You guys have probably all seen this amazing cinematic that we've put together. And they used Cinemachine, so I want to bring him in so he can talk to us a bit about what it was like using Cinemachine on this amazing thing. So we're here with Krasimir Nechevski. He's one of the geniuses working on the Heretic, who has worked on the Heretic project. And I'm sure you've seen videos of the Heretic. It's a really exciting cinematography project. And Cinemachine was used in the making of this film. So Krasimir, maybe just to open up, could you tell us what your role was on the Heretic?
Hello, my role was animation director and lead tech animator. I was in charge of rigging, cameras, motion capture. I was maintaining the mocap studio we have, and basically anything that moves was my responsibility.
Awesome. And what other projects have you worked on that kind of led you up to this?
I joined Unity, and my first project, I was animation director for Adam, basically doing the same stuff, anything that moves. And including designing the crowd system we made there, and the rig of the main character, etc. I also worked on Book of the Dead and other smaller projects.
Cool. All right. So tell me a bit about the use of Cinemachine in the Heretic. My understanding is that you used it more in the second half. And I'd like to understand what the thought process was between those.
Okay, so we wanted to have a subtle difference between the first part and the second part. For the first part, we wanted the viewer to feel like he's in the room with the character. So we used a motion captured virtual camera for this one. And for the second part, we wanted more synthetic, perfect motion. We gliding on perfect curves, no noise, no handheld feel to it. So that's where we used the Cinemachine.
Interesting. Okay, so you wanted a sort of smoother. The opening is a little grittier, and that's the thought process there. That's interesting. Okay, so yeah, I really like that. And what was rewarding for you about using Cinemachine? Like what would made it a good tool for that purpose?
Actually, we used Cinemachine for blocking for the whole thing. Like
right.
The first part, we often blocked cameras because it's easy to put virtual cameras, Cinemachine virtual cameras, and blend between them, and it's very intuitive. Using the scene view as a viewfinder, you can get your angles and just snap your virtual cameras to those. That's this part of it. And automatic framing is also a very valuable feature, because while you are working on the position of the camera, of the trajectory, you are not concerned about the framing. You get it, you set it up, and it stays the same. That's pretty valuable.
So Kras, just to understand that, you'd get a set of an ideal composition, but then you'd experiment with different types of camera blocking and movement, but you would have consistent framing through that.
Yes.
Yeah, that's cool.
Okay.
For example, you want something in the foreground, like a cable to pass in front, and you want to nail it. So you make the framing, and then you try the trajectory to make it more interesting and work only with the foreground. It's very intuitive.
Right. What other rigs did you use? Like you said, the dolly track. So like, what were the Cinemachine components that you used most often?
We used mostly the dolly track and the virtual cameras. We did not use the interactive stuff because our movies are not interactive. Yes, we use this weird different curve that's not exactly Bézier's splines, but a different one.
So you used the dolly tracks a lot, but you needed something a little different out of your splines, the way the curves work, right? How did that work?
Well, the problem with the Bézier originally is that you have to tweak handles. So I know from 3D Studio Max of an easier way to tweak curves for cameras, which are TCB curves, tension, continuity, bias curves. And they work with just numbers. And usually the default 000 is enough. So we implement, the Cinemachine team implemented for us this TCB curve, which was much easier to work with.
So you mentioned, one thing you mentioned earlier was sort of auto framing, and you like that feature. Can you explain what that's doing for you in a cinematic thing, that you've got that feature ready for you?
When you're doing a movie, you want to tell a story, and framing is like crucial to how you tell the story. Like, what do you want to reveal? And being able to separately work on the framing, which is what are you telling to the viewer, without trying and tugging like sliders and stuff, just moving the frame. Mm-hmm. That's very powerful.
So when you're saying moving the frame, like clicking the subject and just dynamically recomposing it in the window?
Yes, the feature that's in the game view, the guidelines, and framing it differently and moving it, that makes a huge difference. And it's very easy to work with. Like anyone, director can just go into a specific place and just, like, for example, the end or the start or the end of the motion, and just say, I want this lower or higher or something like that.
So they can get just what they want in a pretty easy kind of WYSIWYG way. Sorry, I'm showing my age using the word WYSIWYG, but
very fun. We're very we do rely on our tools to be like fast. We kind of want them to be fast and intuitive. Because moving sliders can get you out of this frame of mind that you're thinking about the framing, and you start thinking about some other stuff, like what does this slider do on the other. But so everything needs to be fast and natural.
So let me ask, of like all the stuff you did on the Heretic, like, what are you most proud of? What did you get out of that maybe had never been done before, or you'd never done before, that you felt really, really good about?
The way we made the whole movie is very interesting. Usually the normal way to do films is like more straightforward and more, stable. Like, you start with script, you go through storyboarding, animatic, and then just execute it. It's very predictable, and but our process is very organic, because we don't go out of previous mode almost until the end. We usually change whole sections like the day before we ship. And this flexibility actually, I think, gives people who are not experienced filmmakers the ability to make movies by just trial and error. Because if you're a trained filmmaker, you probably can just imagine the whole movie before that. But if you can't, then getting at it by iterating is another way to go. So it's basically lowering the bar for entry for making films.
That's really fascinating. Okay.
Krasi, it's so great. I mean, you're empowering the ability of real time. And it sounds like, you were open to these what if questions very late. Like, well, what if we shot it from this angle? Or what if we you did this or that, and you can quickly see if it's going to work or not.
Yeah.
Yeah, really cool. So I want to make sure just that we mention that some of the assets from the Heretic are now available on the asset store, I believe. So tell us about what's been released.
So we released the digital human package, which includes Gawain's model, including like his skeleton and rig. But there's these super nice features there. He's posable, so you can actually pose him. And we implemented the facial rig also with it. So there is a sniper's rig that you can tweak inside of the editor, and it overlays. There is one 4D clip because we use this 4D technology for our facial performance, and you can actually layer with the sniper's rig. You can layer on top of the performance that was captured. It's a very interesting package. Another package we released is the Morgan package, which is the VFX editor character.
So just to clarify that, Gawain is the guy that we follow through the story, and Morgan is the sort of demonic character we see at the end of the movie.
Yes, Gawain is the main character, as you said, and the VFX creature is the antagonist.
Right.
Krasi, 2-point question. First point, what's your favorite bit of Cinemachine? And then the second bit is, if you had a magic wand, what would you do? What would you change? What would you add?
My favorite bit was blocking with Cinemachine by using virtual cameras and blending between them. And my perfect tool would be to extend that workflow and make it so you can easily, using the scene view as a viewfinder, stream a lot of angles and just search for them without tweaking any curves or anything like that. You just search for your angles and you snapshot, store them in a sequence, and they smoothly transition from one to the other.
Right. So it's totally like shot driven. It's like result driven, not like input driven.
Yes. Without tweaking parameters or whatever.
Yeah.
It sounds like a great Hack Week project, Adam.
Yeah, we should do it.
So, hey, Krasimir, I want to thank you for appearing on this with us. This has been really great. Hopefully it's informative to the people who are listening in. And we're actually going to go over now to a Q&A so people can ask us, you or Adam and myself or Onat, questions about the various things we've been working on. So thanks very much. Thank you to Onat. Thank you to Krasimir. Now, it looks to me like I certainly have Adam here. You've already seen him. Gregory Labute, who's our lead engineer, is here. Krasimir is here. I don't actually see Onat, so I'm not sure if he made it onto the call or not. So I'll hold. Maybe he'll appear, and if he does, there are some questions for him. But let's start with there's a couple of open questions in the live Q&A. And if you want to, there's a button at the bottom of your screen that says Q&A. You can click in there and add a question if you have something you want to ask. But I think, so Krasimir, when we were chatting with you, this whole thing about the TCB curve system came up. And Steve McKay is asking, will that TCB curve be a feature for the rest of us?
Yeah, it's funny. We've been, Gregory and I have been chatting in parallel on this, and he can't see that question. So I wanted Greg to answer that one because he is the mastermind who made that alternate blend method. So Gregory, that's take it away.
You're in, right?
Hey. So you can hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, so Cinemachine is agnostic as to the actual implementation of the spline. So it comes out of the box with a couple of different kinds, the standard path and the smooth path. But it's very easy to implement a custom path using any kind of data to make your curve. And Cinemachine will just follow it. It doesn't care where the path comes from. So we made a quick one for the TCB splines and gave that to Krasimir. We're happy to share that with whoever wants it.
Great. So Another question we have in here is from Terry Lurie, who asks, what is a good Cinemachine Shots basic 101 resource? Cinematics for dummies or something before jumping into Cinemachine. I would say both Krasimir and Adam, frankly Greg as well, would probably have opinions on good places to learn that sort of knowledge.
So the Unity Learn has got a number of tutorials there. And there's been some great tutorials on YouTube. We've done a few, nowhere near enough. I'm going to loop back to that. And the wonderful people at Brackeys have done some. And Will Goldstone at Unity has also done some. So there are some things on YouTube. So right now, the YouTube, just search Cinemachine tutorials and Unity Learn. And know that we have this big action item written in fat Sharpie to say make more tutorials. So we are going to make more. Sorry that there's not a lot out there already.
Right. Okay, Krasimir, did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
Well, I learned from there. I learned from the Unity page with the tutorials myself.
Cool. Could Unity provide some example scenes with some pre-configured Cinemachine? Asks Terry. Hey Terry, I've got great news for you. We've done this already. When you install Cinemachine through the package manager, you have to look. I'm not sure I love the UX on this, but if you go back into the package manager after you've installed and scroll to the bottom of the Cinemachine page, there's a button, and we have a whole bunch of samples. And we actually have an artist, Luella, she's like an artist developer, and she's working on brand new versions of these. So the ones that are there today, they're functional, they work, they're very helpful. She's going to make them a lot better, I think. So, great question. Thomas G, will we get a series of tutorials for the effective use of Cinemachine? Would be great because it's a big box of features. Connected question. Adam, do you want to say anything more than what I just said about Luella's samples?
The samples, and maybe this is a good time to chat about the rig templates that we're working on too. Marc, why don't you mention that?
Oh yeah, okay. Well, this is a little on the early side, but yeah. So one of the things that we have established, or we believe we've established, is that Cinemachine is very complicated. There's a lot of depth to the feature set, and setting up a camera is the one that you want can be hard, but there are actually a lot of well-known patterns, right? There are setups that you want in an isometric game or in a 2D platformer or in a first-person shooter. And so what we're trying to do, it's a little early yet, but what we're trying to do is we're trying to set up a creation system, kind of like the way you would create a cube, only you would create a particular type of use case for Cinemachine. So again, early days, we haven't quite worked out what the UX needs to be to make that easy for you. But that's the idea, is we would have these pre-fashioned rigs that would get you 80% of where you need to be, and then you could tweak it from there. But you wouldn't have to like relearn every time, how do I create a first-person or third-person setup?
We have this sort of hilarious way of describing it in that Cinemachine is a little bit like bun, mayo, mustard, lettuce, patty.
That's a good way of putting it.
Sometimes you just want a cheeseburger. So what these rigs are going to do is they'll come with pre-configured setups. Like I want a first-person shooter camera. I want an RTS camera. I want a handheld cinematic camera, and it's got everything set up so you can see how to set it up and get going faster than building your Lego thing from pieces every time.
Cool. Somebody asked a question, and I think you may have answered it in the Q&A, but I thought it bore repeating, Adam. So keep your camera on because it's going to come back to you. But somebody was asking about the Onat's blend and transitions. Was it all driven by the data, or did they use some scripting? I think that's a really interesting answer because that system that he put together that included the ability to transition, not just the cameras, but the effects and the audio was really interesting. So maybe just kind of repeat your answer and flesh it out a little.
So Onat, if you're here, I'm going to speak for you a bit. Thank you, and if you can chime in, please do. I'm not sure if you can speak to this, but that project is using a number of different ways to called cameras. And one of the most basic ways is if you have a gameplay camera and then you have a cinematic camera, like in Onat's case, like in one of the rooms, you can just turn on the cinematic camera, and based on what your blend settings are, you'll seamlessly blend from your gameplay camera into that camera. And then as soon as you leave the room, then you just turn that camera off and you seamlessly blend back to the cinematic camera. So it's a really easy way to do those seamless transitions. And the way you can turn that camera on and off is you can do it through a script or through trigger volumes. Another way that he's doing it is also using the mixer camera. And that was with 4 different cameras in a room. And Onat wrote a little script that would mix the blending of those 4 cameras based on the position of your character to 4 empty game objects. So as you got closer to game object 1, you would blend more closely into game object 1. And if you saw in the video, and we'll post this video again after, you can see like the little mixing bars going as the character runs around. You're mixing between those 4 cameras. Really, really great setup. That's exactly what we intended the mixing camera to be used for. It's a fantastic use case.
Yeah. I have to say, so thank you everyone for all the questions. We're not going to have enough time to get to all of them. So what I would encourage everyone to do, I've posted the link, I'll post it one more time, to the thread that we're going to have on our forum. And we will try and get to every question and give you an answer for everything. So if you don't get answered here, that's not the end of it. We'll try and make sure you guys get your answers. So I have several questions here, or at least a few, that relate to crossfades and transitions from one camera to another. So that's not something we do today. And it's a tricky enough problem. What do we see in the future for something like that? Greg, do you want to maybe take a stab at the complexities around that? You and I have discussed this in the past.
Sure. Doing a pixel-based blend, which is what a cross dissolve is, or some other kind of wipe or transition of that nature, necessarily involves 2 cameras. You've got to capture with actual cameras rendering into textures both sources, and then in a pixel way combine them and display that on the final screen. So that's really something that's outside of the domain of Cinemachine, because what Cinemachine does is it moves cameras around, it drives cameras. It doesn't blend the results in a pixel way from multiple cameras. You would just have to do that separately. That said, there is a way with Cinemachine to do cross dissolves and fade to black and fade to white. And you do that using the storyboard extension. There's a couple of threads on the forum about that where it's explained in detail how to do it. Just, I think if you search for cross dissolve on the Cinemachine forum, I think you'll find them. So it is possible, but that's a very specific case, and we don't generally support wipes and other kinds of fancy transitions.
Right. Okay. Thank you for that. That was a much clearer answer than I could have given. Okay, this is maybe a great one to wrap up. I think we should talk, and Greg, you should stay online for this one because you're probably going to be the best person to answer it. Is Cinemachine compatible with hybrid renderer, and can we use it inside ECS?
Yes, and yes. So inside ECS is a little bit vague.
Yeah.
So
we'll talk a bit about
okay,
where we're at with dots.
Yeah. So Cinemachine is a game object-based tool, which means if you're making a pure dots game or a tiny game, you can't use it because Cinemachine relies on the presence of game objects. At the same time, we are in parallel writing a completely new version of Cinemachine, and it's largely done as I speak, that is completely implemented using dots, and that is compatible with a pure dots game, as well as being compatible with a hybrid game that uses the hybrid renderer and some dots components and some game object components. So the short answer is yes, Cinemachine is compatible. The slightly longer answer is not the current Cinemachine. So you have to wait.
Yeah, it's going to be a while. Just to be really frank with everyone, it's going to be a little while before we're quite there with the dots version that we can really put out in front of you. I think it would just frustrate people at its current state. But it is coming along, and we're pretty excited about it. And Adam talked about that in the video. All right, we are a little bit over time. So again, thanks everyone. Thank you again for putting up with the technical problems earlier. Adam, Krasimir, Greg, thank you for helping out. Do you guys have any last words you'd like to offer to the crowd?
Thanks for being users. Thanks for all the feedback. Hit the forums and chat with us if you want to know more things. And we really appreciate all the info you've given us.
Yeah, really appreciate it. And I will be looking again at all the questions that are still in there. And please repeat them. If you didn't hear your question answered, my apologies. But do drop them in that forum thread. We would love to hear from you. Okay. Thanks again. Take care.